The morning sun cast long shadows across the shooting range as 8-year-old Marcus Thompson stepped out of his grandfather's old pickup truck. The boy clutched a worn leather case that seemed almost too heavy for his small frame. Around him, seasoned military personnel and weekend warriors were setting up their equipment, their conversations filled with technical jargon about ballistics and precision shooting. Marcus had always been different from other kids his age. While his classmates spent their afternoons playing video games or riding bicycles, he found himself drawn to the quiet discipline of target shooting. It started innocently enough when his grandfather, a retired Marine sniper, noticed the boy's unusual focus and steady hands during a family camping trip. "That child has something special," his grandfather had told Marcus's parents after watching the boy thread a needle with remarkable precision for someone so young. "His hand-eye coordination is unlike anything I've seen in my 40 years of service." The shooting range that morning was buzzing with activity. A group of Navy SEALs had arrived for their monthly qualification tests, their presence commanding respect from everyone around. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were among the most elite marksmen in the world, men who had spent years perfecting their craft in some of the most dangerous environments on Earth. As Marcus walked toward the firing line with his grandfather, whispers began to spread among the other shooters. Some chuckled at the sight of such a young child carrying what appeared to be a serious rifle case. Others shook their heads in disapproval, wondering why someone would bring a kid to what was clearly an adult environment. "Is that little boy seriously planning to shoot today?" one of the SEALs asked his teammate, barely concealing his amusement. "I hope they've got some toy targets set up for him." The range officer, a gruff former Army sergeant named Bill Henderson, approached Marcus and his grandfather with a concerned expression. He had been running this facility for over 15 years and had strict policies about age requirements and safety protocols. "Listen, I appreciate you wanting to teach the boy about firearm safety," Henderson said to Marcus's grandfather, "but this isn't really the place for children. We've got serious shooters here today, including some military personnel doing official qualifications." Marcus's grandfather, Thomas Thompson, stood his ground with the quiet confidence of a man who had earned his stripes on battlefields around the world. "My grandson isn't here to play games, Sergeant. He's been training for 2 years, and I guarantee he knows more about firearm safety than half the weekend warriors you get through here." The conversation was drawing attention from nearby shooters, including the SEAL team that was preparing for their qualification round. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, the team leader, walked over with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism written across his face. "What seems to be the problem here?" Morrison asked, his eyes moving between the elderly Marine and the small boy who stood silently beside him. "No problem at all," Thomas replied calmly. "Just getting my grandson set up for some practice time." Morrison looked down at Marcus, taking in the boy's serious expression and the way he held himself with unusual composure for someone so young. There was something in the child's eyes that reminded him of seasoned soldiers he had served alongside, a quiet intensity that spoke of focus and determination. "How old is he?" Morrison asked. 8 years old, but he's been shooting since he was 6, Thomas answered proudly. "Started him on a .22 rifle and worked our way up. Safety first, always." The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, with several shooters abandoning their own preparations to witness this unusual scene. Some were shaking their heads in disbelief, while others seemed genuinely curious about what would happen next. "Look, I respect what you're trying to do with the kid," Morrison said diplomatically, "but we're running serious qualification tests today. These benchmarks were designed for trained military personnel. Maybe you should consider coming back on a quieter day when there's less pressure." It was then that Marcus spoke for the first time since arriving at the range. His voice was clear and steady, without a trace of the nervousness that might be expected from a child in such an intimidating environment. "I understand this is important for you, sir," Marcus said, looking directly at the SEAL team leader. "I don't want to get in anyone's way." But my grandfather brought me here because he thinks I'm ready to challenge myself. I've been practicing every day for 2 years, and I know I can do this safely." The sincerity in the boy's voice caught Morrison off guard. There was no arrogance or childish bravado, just a quiet confidence that seemed far beyond his years. The SEAL had seen that same quality in some of the best soldiers he had ever worked with. Henderson, the range officer, was still hesitant. Even if the boy is skilled for his age, the liability issues alone make this problematic. What if something goes wrong? What if he gets hurt or worse, hurts someone else? Thomas pulled out a thick folder from his jacket pocket, filled with certificates and documentation. Marcus has completed every youth safety course available in 3 different states. He's been certified by 2 different NRA instructors, and his shooting scores consistently exceed adult beginner levels. As the adults debated the situation, Marcus quietly unzipped his rifle case and began the methodical process of setting up his equipment. His movements were deliberate and precise, following a clearly rehearsed safety protocol that impressed even the skeptical range officer. The rifle itself was a surprise to many of the onlookers. It wasn't a child's toy or a scaled-down beginner's weapon, but a legitimate precision rifle that had been carefully modified to accommodate Marcus's smaller frame. The scope was properly mounted and clearly well-maintained, and the boy handled every component with the respect and care of someone who truly understood the responsibility that came with handling such equipment. "Tell you what," Morrison said after watching Marcus's setup routine, "if the range officer agrees, how about we let the kid take a few practice shots? Nothing official, just see what he can do. If he proves he belongs here, maybe we can work something out." Henderson considered the proposal carefully. The boy's setup procedure had been flawless, and his grandfather's credentials were clearly legitimate. More importantly, the SEALs seemed genuinely interested in seeing what Marcus could accomplish, which suggested this might be more than just a publicity stunt. "All right," Henderson finally agreed, "but we do this by the book. The boy shoots under direct supervision, follows every safety protocol to the letter, and if I see anything that concerns me, we shut it down immediately." As word spread throughout the range that the young boy was actually going to shoot, a crowd began to gather behind the firing line. Some came out of genuine curiosity, while others seemed to be waiting for the inevitable moment when the child would prove he was in over his head. Marcus remained focused on his preparation, seemingly oblivious to the attention he was drawing. He adjusted his shooting mat, checked his rifle's safety mechanism one final time, and settled into a prone shooting position that looked surprisingly natural for someone so young. "Whenever you're ready, son," Henderson called out, his voice carrying a tone of professional respect that hadn't been there earlier. The range fell silent as Marcus took his first deep breath and aligned his sight picture with the target downrange. Even the SEALs, who had seen some of the finest marksmen in the world, found themselves holding their breath as they waited to see what this unusual 8-year-old could accomplish. What happened next would change everything anyone at that range thought they knew about natural talent, dedication, and the true meaning of precision shooting. The little boy who had been mocked and dismissed was about to prove that greatness comes in all sizes, and that sometimes the most extraordinary abilities are found in the most unexpected places. The crack of Marcus's first shot echoed across the range, followed by an immediate silence that seemed to stretch for eternity. Through his binoculars, Range Officer Henderson examined the target at 100 yards and felt his jaw drop. The bullet had struck dead center, creating a perfect hole in the bullseye that would have been impressive for any adult shooter, let alone an 8-year-old child. "Well, I'll be damned," Henderson muttered under his breath, lowering his binoculars with a look of genuine amazement. The crowd of onlookers buzzed with excitement and disbelief. Staff Sergeant Morrison borrowed Henderson's binoculars to confirm what seemed impossible. The shot wasn't just good for a child, it was exceptional by any standard. The kind of precision that took most people years to develop had apparently come naturally to this quiet boy from a small town. "That's got to be beginner's luck," one of the weekend shooters called out from the back of the crowd. "Let's see if he can do it again." Marcus's grandfather, Thomas, watched his grandson with a mixture of pride and knowing confidence. He had seen this level of performance from Marcus dozens of times during their private training sessions, but he understood why others found it difficult to believe. Natural talent of this magnitude was extremely rare, even among professional marksmen. "Marcus," Thomas called out calmly, "why don't you take 4 more shots? Show these folks that first one wasn't just luck." The boy nodded silently and prepared for his second shot. His breathing was controlled and rhythmic, his body position unchanged from the first attempt. There was no sign of pressure or nervousness, despite the dozens of eyes watching his every movement. The second shot rang out, followed quickly by the third, fourth, and fifth. Each time, Henderson checked the target through his binoculars, and each time his expression grew more incredulous. All 5 shots had clustered within a space smaller than a quarter, creating what professional shooters called a one-hole group, the kind of accuracy that many experienced marksmen spent their entire careers trying to achieve. "This is impossible," one of the SEALs whispered to his teammate. "I've been shooting professionally for 12 years, and I've never seen groupings that tight from anyone, let alone a kid." Morrison approached Marcus as the boy was safely clearing his rifle. The SEAL team leader had initially been skeptical, then mildly impressed, but now he was genuinely curious about what he was witnessing. This wasn't just good shooting. This was the kind of natural ability that military snipers spent months in specialized schools trying to develop. "Son, where did you learn to shoot like that?" Morrison asked, crouching down to Marcus's eye level. Marcus looked up at the imposing SEAL with the same quiet confidence he had displayed all morning. "My grandfather taught me everything about safety and technique, but the shooting part just feels natural. When I look through the scope, it's like the target is pulling the crosshairs to the right spot." The simplicity of the boy's explanation somehow made his achievement even more remarkable. He wasn't describing complex breathing techniques or advanced trigger control. He was talking about shooting the way most people talked about walking or riding a bicycle, as if it were an instinctive ability rather than a learned skill. Henderson walked over to the group, still shaking his head in amazement. "In all my years running this range, I've never seen anything like that." "Those 5 shots would qualify for expert marksman rating in any military branch." "What's the current SEAL benchmark for the 100-yard qualification?" Thomas asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to make a point. Morrison glanced at his teammates before responding. "For our unit, we need to maintain a 4-inch grouping at 100 yards using standard issue equipment. That's considered excellent performance for operational personnel." "And what did my grandson just accomplish?" Henderson measured the group with his calipers and announced the result to the growing crowd. 1 3/4 inches. Under combat conditions with people watching and talking, using his own equipment that he set up in less than 10 minutes. The murmur of conversation from the onlookers grew louder as the implications of this measurement began to sink in. The 8-year-old boy had not only met the SEAL qualification standard, he had exceeded it by a significant margin, and he had done it under conditions that would have challenged even experienced military marksmen. "I think we need to step this up a notch," Morrison announced, making a decision that would change the entire tone of the morning's events. "How would you feel about trying the same test our team is here to complete today?" The suggestion sent a wave of excitement through the crowd. The SEAL qualification test was legendary among civilian shooters for its difficulty and precision requirements. It involved multiple distances, different shooting positions, and time constraints that pushed even elite military personnel to their limits. "What exactly does that involve?" Thomas asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected his grandson would be up for the challenge. Morrison outlined the test parameters: 5 shots each at 100, 200, and 300 yards, using 3 different shooting positions: prone, sitting, and standing. Each distance had its own time limit, and the cumulative scoring had to meet strict military standards that were used to evaluate the readiness of some of America's most elite fighting forces. The standing position at 300 yards is particularly challenging, Morrison explained. Most civilian shooters struggle with that distance even from a supported position. We require all shots to stay within a 6-inch circle, which demands exceptional skill and concentration. Marcus listened to the description with the same calm attention he had shown all morning. When Morrison finished explaining the test, the boy simply nodded and asked, "When do we start?" The confidence in that simple question took everyone by surprise. There was no hesitation, no request for practice time or additional preparation. Marcus was ready to take on a challenge that had been specifically designed to test the limits of professional military marksmen. "Hold on now," Henderson interjected, his concern for safety overriding his amazement at the boy's earlier performance. "This is a significant step up in difficulty and pressure. Are you sure about this?" Thomas placed a reassuring hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Marcus has been training for situations exactly like this. We've practiced all 3 positions at these distances on my property back home. If he says he's ready, then he's ready." The SEAL team gathered around Morrison for a brief consultation. They had come to the range for their own quarterly qualification, but this unexpected development had turned into something far more interesting than routine military training. The possibility of witnessing something truly extraordinary was too compelling to ignore. "All right," Morrison decided, "but we do this properly. Official timing, official scoring, and official witnesses. If this young man is going to attempt our qualification standard, then we're going to treat it with the same respect we'd show any member of our team." As the range was reconfigured for the more complex test, word continued to spread among the other shooters present. What had started as casual curiosity about a young boy with a rifle had transformed into what many recognized as a potentially historic moment. The crowd grew larger as people abandoned their own shooting activities to witness this unprecedented challenge. Marcus used the preparation time to adjust his equipment for the longer distances and review his shooting positions with his grandfather. His calm demeanor remained unchanged, despite the increasing attention and the magnitude of what he was about to attempt. If anything, he seemed to become more focused as the stakes grew higher. "Remember everything we practiced," Thomas whispered to his grandson as they made final preparations. "Trust your training, trust your instincts, and don't let the crowd distract you from what you know how to do." The boy nodded silently, his young face set with the kind of determination that would have been impressive in a seasoned competitor. As he took his position for the first stage of the test, even the most skeptical observers found themselves rooting for him to succeed. What was about to unfold would not only silence the doubters who had mocked the little boy with the rifle, but would also force everyone present to reconsider their assumptions about talent, age, and the true meaning of natural ability. The real test was just beginning, and Marcus was ready to show the world what 8 years old could accomplish when backed by dedication, training, and an extraordinary gift. The transformation in the atmosphere at the shooting range was palpable as Marcus prepared for the official SEAL qualification test. What had begun with snickers and dismissive comments had evolved into hushed anticipation and genuine respect. Even the most experienced shooters present understood they were about to witness something potentially extraordinary. Morrison called out the first stage parameters: 100 yards, prone position, 5 shots, time limit of 3 minutes. Begin when ready. Marcus settled into his familiar prone position with the fluid movements of someone who had performed this routine countless times. His breathing slowed to a steady rhythm as he acquired his sight picture and began the mental process that had become second nature through 2 years of intensive training with his grandfather. The first shot at 100 yards struck the target with devastating precision, followed by 4 more shots delivered with mechanical consistency. When Henderson called out the results, a group measuring less than 2 inches with all shots well within the required parameters, The crowd's murmur of approval was tinged with genuine amazement. "Outstanding work," Morrison acknowledged, though his tone suggested he was reserving judgment until the more challenging distances were attempted. 200 yards, sitting position. This is where things get interesting. The sitting position presented unique challenges that tested a shooter's ability to maintain stability without the support provided by the prone position. Many experienced marksmen struggled with this particular combination of distance and shooting stance, as it required exceptional muscle control and breath management. Marcus transitioned to the sitting position with practiced efficiency, crossing his legs and settling into a stable shooting platform that his grandfather had taught him through hundreds of repetitions. The technique looked natural and comfortable, as if the boy had been born knowing how to hold his body for maximum accuracy. The shots at 200 yards came in steady succession, each one accompanied by the sharp crack that indicated proper trigger control and consistent follow-through. When the group was measured, it came in at just under 3 inches, well within the SEAL standard, and impressive enough to draw approving nods from the military personnel watching. "2 for 2, one of the SEALs commented to his teammate. But the real test is coming up. The 300-yard standing position was universally acknowledged as the most difficult portion of the qualification test. Without any physical support beyond his own body, a shooter had to maintain perfect stability while dealing with the additional challenges presented by the extended distance. Wind conditions, breathing control, and trigger technique all became critical factors that could easily result in missed shots or poor groupings. Marcus stood up and walked to the 300-yard firing line with the same calm confidence he had displayed throughout the morning. The crowd had grown significantly larger, with people coming from other parts of the range complex to witness what many were calling the most remarkable shooting demonstration they had ever seen. "Son," Henderson called out, "this last stage has humbled some very good shooters. Don't feel bad if it doesn't go perfectly. What you've already accomplished today is extraordinary." The boy turned to face the range officer with a slight smile, the first real emotion he had shown all day. "Thank you, sir, but my grandfather always taught me to finish what I start. I didn't come here to do part of the test." Thomas Thompson watched his grandson with a mixture of pride and amazement that went far beyond what any grandfather might feel watching a child succeed at a hobby. He had recognized Marcus's exceptional abilities early on, but even he was impressed by the boy's composure under pressure and his ability to perform at this level in front of so many experienced observers. 300 yards, standing position, 5 shots, 4-minute time limit, Morrison announced. "This is the same test that every member of my team has to pass twice a year to maintain their operational status." Marcus raised his rifle to his shoulder and began the careful process of acquiring his sight picture at the distant target. The 300-yard distance turned the bullseye into a small dot that would challenge even the most experienced marksman. Wind conditions that were barely noticeable at shorter ranges became significant factors that required constant adjustment and compensation. The first shot seemed to take forever as Marcus worked through his breathing cycle and squeezed the trigger with the same deliberate control he had demonstrated all morning. The bullet's impact was visible through binoculars as a clean hit well within the scoring area. Shot after shot followed with the same methodical precision that had characterized his entire performance. Marcus seemed completely unaware of the dozens of people watching his every movement, focusing entirely on the process that his grandfather had drilled into him through countless practice sessions. When the final shot was fired and the rifle was safely cleared, the range fell into complete silence as Henderson made his way downrange to score the target. The walk to 300 yards seemed to take an eternity, with every person present straining to see the results of what many had already concluded was an unprecedented demonstration of natural shooting ability. Henderson's voice carried clearly across the range as he called out the final measurement. "Group size, 2 7/8 inches. All shots within the required scoring area. Perfect qualification score." The explosion of cheers and applause that followed was unlike anything the shooting range had ever experienced. Grown men who had spent their careers perfecting their marksmanship skills were celebrating the achievement of an 8-year-old boy who had just outperformed standards designed for the world's most elite military units. Morrison approached Marcus with an expression of genuine awe and respect. "Son, in 15 years as a SEAL, I have never seen anyone, and I mean anyone, achieve those groupings on their first attempt at our qualification test. Most of my team members took multiple attempts to reach that level of consistency." The boy accepted the praise with the same quiet dignity he had shown all morning. "My grandfather is a good teacher, and I practice every day. I just try to do what he taught me and not think too much about anything else." As word of Marcus's achievements spread beyond the immediate crowd at the range, people began taking photos and making phone calls to share what they had witnessed. The story of the 8-year-old who had outshot Navy SEAL benchmarks would become legendary in shooting sports circles, but for the people present that day, it was much more than just an impressive performance. Thomas Thompson was surrounded by admirers wanting to know his training methods and the secret behind his grandson's extraordinary abilities. His answer was always the same. There's no secret beyond safety, practice, and respect for the equipment. Marcus was born with natural ability, but talent without discipline is worthless. Henderson, the gruff range officer who had initially been reluctant to allow Marcus to shoot, found himself reevaluating everything he thought he knew about age restrictions and assumptions. "In 40 years around firearms," he told anyone who would listen, "I've learned never to underestimate anyone, but today, that boy taught me that lesson all over again." The SEAL team's quarterly qualification continued after Marcus's demonstration, but their hearts weren't really in it. Several team members approached the boy afterward, asking for tips and advice, a remarkable reversal that spoke to the profound impact of what they had witnessed. As the Thompson family prepared to leave the range that afternoon, Marcus carefully cleaned and secured his rifle with the same methodical attention to detail that had characterized his entire performance. For him, the day had been a success, not because of the accolades or the amazement of others, but because he had been able to demonstrate the skills his grandfather had worked so hard to teach him. The drive home was quiet, with both grandfather and grandson processing the events of the day in their own ways. Thomas knew that his grandson's life was about to change significantly, with offers for sponsorships, training opportunities, and media attention that would come from word spreading about the boy's achievement. But Marcus seemed unchanged by the experience, already planning his next practice session and asking his grandfather about techniques for shooting at even longer distances. For him, the day at the range had been less about proving anything to others and more about testing himself against the highest standards he could find. The little boy who had been mocked for holding a rifle had not only silenced his critics, but had established himself as a genuine prodigy in the world of precision shooting. His achievement would inspire other young people to pursue their passions, regardless of what others might think, and would remind everyone who heard the story that extraordinary ability can emerge from the most unexpected sources. Years later, when Marcus had grown into one of the world's most accomplished competitive shooters, he would still remember that day at the range as the moment when he learned that the only limitations that truly matter are the ones we place on ourselves. The mocking voices had been replaced by cheers of admiration, and the little boy with the rifle had proven that greatness recognizes no age limits when it is backed by dedication, proper training, and an unwavering belief in one's own potential.